There it is. Bam.
Hey, I'm Philip Ingram, and you're watching the Break It Down show. And hey, if you haven't guessed already, look at the flags. This is where I'm coming from.
That's right. That's right. So are you okay? It's always tough for us Americans. UK, Great Britain, England. Like, what is all the? How do you figure that out? I was going to start somewhere else, but let's back up. What is UK versus Great Britain versus the Commonwealth?
Right. Great Britain is the big island, which is England, Scotland, and Wales.
Okay.
The United Kingdom is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So United Kingdom includes Northern Ireland. Great Britain doesn't. However, those in Northern Ireland who align with the United Kingdom call themselves British. And this is where the confusion comes in. But then if you want to really upset those that are from the Republic of Ireland, you call the island chain that's of Great Britain and the Irish island and all the little islands that are around it, the British Isles, which many atlases do call. And therefore, yes, it's highly confusing. And it's designed deliberately to confuse, especially people from America.
We're easy to confuse. You don't have to design shit to confuse us because we obliged. We're always confused. There's another thing that's crazy about the greater England area is that it's about the size of Texas, the UK, right? Yeah. And you guys have more distinct accents than they do in Texas, and Texas is huge, you know, and that's also wild.
And they're also like regional languages. You know, I go to certain parts of the UK, and you said the Greater England area. That's a big no-no. You know, the one part of the UK. Excuse me, I've got a bad cough. It's not COVID. I've tested, and we should be shielded if you've got the right antivirus software on your computers. So you're not going to get the viruses from me through this. But no, you know, if you look at the different nations around the UK, and that's what brings it together with the Scots, the Welsh, the English and the Irish, the Northern Irish. The one nation that doesn't really have an identity are the English, because Scotland's got its own parliament, Northern Ireland's got its own parliament, Wales has got its own parliament. The English don't. Yeah. Whenever you get international sport that's going on, you know, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales all have their own national anthems that they will play for the regional anthems. You know, they're in United States terms, they're barely counties in size, but you know, they've got that. Whereas the English play God Save the King. Well, God Save the King is the anthem for the United Kingdom. It's not just England, you know, and they try to play this, everything is England. No, is it I'm going to swear here. Can I say this in American terms? Is it bollocks? Because, you know, the importance of the United Kingdom is the diversity that it brings and everything. And England is the one country that lacks a proper identity. And therefore, it's always trying to assert its control over the other elements that are in there and suggest it's better. Is it heck? You know, the rest of us gang up together and quite happily support any team that's playing England and hope that they'll win.
It's also, if we're going to dig deep into that lack of identity thing, you know, Normandy comes from the Normans, which comes from England, which really comes from the Vikings. Yeah. And then like the Sussex, Wessex, all that. That's Germans. That's from the Saxons, of right? Course, and yes. So,
well, it's the Anglo-Saxons, and you know that's just recent history. But you get into sort of British history. You get into Irish history. It's even more confusing. And this is where it's lovely. You know, in simplistic terms, everyone across the world thinks that the problems in Ireland are that England invaded Ireland and conquered Ireland, and it's the English versus the Irish, and the English were Protestants and came in, therefore deposed the Irish Catholics and stopped them from doing what they wanted to do, and therefore it's Protestant against Catholic. Again, is it bollocks? Yeah. And you know, that's fascinating. The big thing that everyone concentrates on, and I'm from Northern Ireland. I'm Northern Irish Protestant. I lived in a very mixed area and was brought up in a quite a tolerant background and all the rest of it. But the big thing that everyone focuses on as the issue in Ireland, or Northern Ireland in particular, are the 12th of July parades, the orange parades that are going out and everything else. The clues in the colour that I've just said, orange parades. And they relate back to a battle in 1690. Did the United States exist in 1690?
No.
So we're going into, in United States terms, we're going to prehistorical terms.
Right.
And 1690, there was this great big battle called the Battle of the Boyne, which is a river that is in the Republic of Ireland at the moment. And on the Battle of the Boyne, there was two sides that were fighting. There were the Orange forces under King William of Orange, who was actually a Dutchman, who'd taken over the British crown because all the royal families across Europe were related to each other because they'd all intermarried and were cousins and brothers and sisters and all the rest of it, different levels of intermarriage. He was a Dutch interloper who'd taken over the British crown, and he'd brought in a mercenary army that was combined of primarily Germans and Scots. And they were in the north of Ireland. And he was fighting. He was a Protestant because he was a Dutchman, and he was fighting against the uprise of Catholicism. Catholicism was massive in Ireland anyway, but he was doing it because on the orders of the Pope, because the Pope didn't want Ireland to usurp the Vatican and usurp Italy and the Pope's influence across Europe, and was concerned about Ireland rising. So you've got a Protestant king with his Protestant mercenary armies in the north of Ireland fighting against the Irish armies in the south. But the Irish armies in the south were led by an individual called James. He just happened to be James I, King of England. So we've got an English king leading the Irish Catholic armies to fight against a Dutch interloper, primarily made up of Germans and Scots, who was backed by the Pope. And this is where people have translated this into today, the Orange March as being Catholic versus Protestant and English versus Irish. Again, is it bollocks? It's complicated. And if you apply that level of complication from 1690 into every other country around the world and what people can be doing and the different ethnic factions you get across Europe, or you get across the United States, you get across continental America, we would all be having real problems left, right, and center. And this is where it's too easy for us today to want to be simplistic and try and put things into simplistic boxes. Life's not like that. Yeah,
and we were talking just off mic, just for a few seconds, but like this, and we always throw sectarian things on top of problems. Like Iraq. Oh, it's sectarian violence. Well, okay, you have to eliminate the political problem. You have to eliminate the class problem. You have to eliminate the fact that there is no Kurdistan. You have Turkmen there. You have the Yazidis there. You have Chaldeans there. You have Assyrians. You have all these different sets of people.
Well, on that one, it's fascinating. I remember in Bosnia, and I was a planning officer in NATO headquarters that went in where NATO took over from the United Nations for the Dayton Peace Agreement. Right. And we're sitting there and we got the Dayton Peace Agreement and we're going in. We're looking at the fighting around the different villages that there were. And for those listeners that aren't aware, in Bosnia, there were sort of three ethnic groupings. There were the Croats, there were the Serbs, and there were the Muslims. And we'd be sitting there going, right, that's really easy. We've got three little boxes, Croats, Serbs, and Muslims. We can understand this from an intelligence perspective by working out who's doing what. And then we'd look at what's going on in a little village. And in a little village, we'd find this is brilliant because the Croats are fighting the Serbs are fighting the Muslims, the Croats are fighting the Muslims, and therefore they're all fighting each other. Brilliant. That ticks the box. Then we go to the next little village and we find that the Serbs and Croats were fighting the Muslims. And we go, okay, why are they joining together? Because they hate each other. Yeah. And why are they doing this? Yeah. Then we go to the next little village that was only sort of a mile away, 2 miles away. Yeah. And we find that the Muslims and the Serbs were together and fighting the Croats. We're going, but actually the Serbs massacred the Muslims in Srebrenica. So why are they together and they're fighting that? Yeah. And then the next village would find another combination going through. And what we then started to work out as we started to talk to people and really got into this was, it wasn't to do with the ethnic groupings that we put labels on people in there, that because of their family name and their family background. What it was families settling scores that went back to the Second World War. Yes. And we're going, oh my God, right. That therefore makes sense.
But wait, I want to jump in because you and I, we talked about this. We both were there at the same time. So I'm on the ground and I'm just going to invent a story here, but this is what happens. Like So there's a romance, like a Romeo and Juliet story. Bozo Dorkovich, and I'm making that name up. He falls in love with Zlata, and Zlata and him have this passionate love story. And she's Croatian, and he's a Muslim, he's a Bosnian, and it's a forbidden love. And yet they have 15 kids, and these kids go out, and all of a sudden you have all these Bosnian, Croatian kids that then fall in love and have Serbian kids, and all of a sudden you have all these kids that are mixed origin, and it muddies everything. And that was so common. Like, no, I'm a Serb Croat, but I cannot stand and then they would say the other thing, like the Bosnian Serbs, and you're like, wait, what? Huh? And you couldn't keep track of it. And you're like, but they would always talk about this patrilineal person in their family who changed everything in their region. And then you go to the next, like you said, the next village over, the next hamlet over, and there'd be this different person who was the farmer. And he had, it's like we have like this John Wayne character, it's like, I'll be damned. And that was the guy. And whoever he had sex with, I mean, I might have sex with 10 different women, but they would create this village, and that would be it. And then they would be
welcome to Ireland. And this is why, as a British Army intelligence officer who's actually Irish by background from Northern Ireland, getting into all of these different conflict zones and bits and pieces, I can relate to it because it's dead easy. It's what I grew up with. There's just different labels, and you understand that you automatically have this understanding of the complexity because you don't have to pigeonhole things like the English try to do, and many of the Americans love to do, because people love to, especially our politicians, they love to put things into simplistic little boxes. Yeah. And if only the world was a series of simplistic little boxes, it would be so much easier to understand, and we wouldn't have completely cocked up Afghanistan and Iraq and all the rest of it if it had worked that simplistically.
All right, so let me jump in right there, because we're about to go cock up Ukraine, right? And you and I have seen us do this, and I am going to be really hard on the politicians, the policy people, because they have feelings on what should happen. But you and I both know they don't have the ground truth that guys like us do. Like, you'll go out and you'll say, this is what we think this map looks like. Pete, what does it look like? And I'm like, it looks nothing like that. And so then you and I will try to straighten the map out, and we'll realize it's way more complex, and all of the things that we know are wrong. And we'll say, everybody slow down. And they're like, but we're on this plan. And we're like, fuck the plan. The plan is wrong. So what are the mistakes that we make? How do we reduce those? And what do we do so we don't? And look, Ukraine is rich with resources. There's a lot of people that want to make a lot of money.
Ukraine is fascinating. The job I was in that took me to Bosnia. After that, the organization I was part of, I was a NATO planner. I planned NATO's as part of the role when we weren't doing Bosnia and doing Kosovo and doing what's now North Macedonia and other things. Plant NATO's defenses along its whole eastern border. So whenever First Guards Tank Army attacked into Ukraine, I went, oh my God, I know that formation. I've planned NATO's defenses against it. Oh, this is going to be interesting. And worked out that our assessments that we got were completely wrong. They were complete shite compared to what we'd assessed them to be, along with a lot of the others. But this is where I think, from a Western perspective, especially Western political perspective, as we analyze Ukraine, so many commentators are getting it wrong, getting it badly wrong. The current counteroffensive from the Ukrainians, nobody had expected Ukraine to last as long as it's lasted. They expected Russia, the supposed second largest military capability in the world, to walk all over Ukraine in a couple of days. The Ukrainians give them a real bloody nose and have pushed them back. And since the Russians withdrew from Kyiv and started to withdraw their forces into the east and left there, the Ukrainians have retained the military initiative. And what the Ukrainians are doing at the minute in their counteroffensive, and they're making very slow progress from a tactical perspective on the ground as they go forward. But from an operational and strategic perspective, they're giving us a massive lesson in and here's where I'm sorry, I'm going to apologize to people that are out there. I'm going to get into military babble speak and things, but in multi-dimensional military operations, which is something that we have not been involved in properly since the Second World War. We've never done it. And they're doing it with a severe lack of resources. For example, supporting the tactical operation in where they started the counteroffensive. Before we started our last tactical offensive operation, which was Desert Storm in Iraq, we had 37 days of B-52s and every other bloody aircraft possible, completely pummeling the Iraqi defenses, the Iraqi defensive positions, the Iraqi formations, and everything else, and moving any mines and anything else that they got with 500 and 1,000-pound bombs, massive distances. The Ukrainians haven't had that. And what the Ukrainians are doing tactically on the ground is having to move forward through defenses that make the Iraqi defenses look like, a simple chalk line in the ground. Never mind what's in there. We've never seen this level of defensive preparation beforehand in modern history, and I'll include that in anything in the Second World War. And the Ukrainians are having to push the way through that. So what are they doing in there? They're working their way forward very slowly. And there's a very telling comment came out of a German tank commander only a couple of days ago, who turned around and said, our analysis of every Leopard 2A6 that's been hit by the Russians and its impact on the Ukrainian tank crews that have been fighting inside Ukraine is not one single crew member has been killed or injured. They've all got away. Hey, that's armored vehicles doing what armored vehicles are supposed to do: keep the crew alive. Right. And most of those armored vehicles are being dragged back, been taken off to Poland, being repaired, and being brought back in again. Only one or two are getting lost. The same with Bradleys, and the same with other vehicles. But the Ukrainians are taking the fight tactically very carefully, and they've got the initiative, and they're keeping the momentum going. At an operational level, they are really screwing the Russians around, because they're not allowing the Russians to concentrate their reserve forces in any way, because there's such a wide frontage. It's about 250 kilometers of front line, and the Russians don't know where to concentrate. And every time they do concentrate, with HIMARS and with the 155 millimeter tube artillery, cluster ammunition, and with Storm Shadow that the UK is given and all the rest of it, their command and control, their logistics hubs, their collections of where they're repairing their armored vehicles, where their infantry are getting out of the train stations, and all the rest are all being hit. And the Ukrainians are destroying the Russians at an operational level and keeping them down. And then you go up to the strategic level and you look at what's going on there. You look at the confusion that's happening with the Prigozhin attempted coup, with what's happened there, with the command and control structure from Putin the whole way down. Combine that with now the Russian people are saying drones hitting Moscow. They're saying strategic airfields being hit, and the Ilyushin 76s, 4 of them being destroyed last night, and Tupolev 22 strategic bombers being destroyed on the ground in Russia. And the Russians can't keep Russian home space safe, from their own people, because Prigozhin managed to get 1,000 kilometers in 24 hours almost, and then the Ukrainian drones that are been able to get in there. This is causing Putin and the Russians real problems, and the Ukrainians are giving us a masterclass in multi-domain simultaneous operations. And I think they're, from a military perspective, their counteroffensive is doing exceptionally well. From a Western political perspective, it's not following a timeline. Someone has got a calendar out and gone, by that date, we need to achieve that, and therefore we'll give another set of things. We've got the presidential elections coming up, so we have to achieve this by then. And that's the trouble. That's what's dictating it. It's Western political timelines are dictating people's views, rather than the reality of the complexity of what the Ukrainians are doing from a military perspective and a military.
And this is all new too, right? Like this is never ever in the history of like something like this. Maybe 80 years ago, but this is new. So I want your thoughts on this too. One of the things we're dealing with is, and I've been looking a lot into this. We have this belief, and I believe this comes from our left-leaning section of our policy people who are that's kind of where they're educated. So they don't like successful business people. They think that they're negative. So they'll call them oligarchs. Some of them are oligarchs. On our side, we have someone like Elon Musk, who's like, hey, you can communicate using my satellite network. I'm really kind of unsure about this. You can use it for free for a while, but after a while, you're going to have to pay for it. And I really don't want you to use it for offense, which sounds like an oligarch to me. But, where do you draw the line? But Ukraine is like, hey, we don't want to allow our billionaires to help us fund the war, except for when we can buy arms from them. And yet in American history, our Carnegie, our Mellon, our guys were like, yeah, we're gonna use our financial might to help fund things like World War I, World War II, because we have to do this. And so we see this reluctance to allow the business machine of Ukraine and the business wealth of Ukraine to allow Ukraine to kind of stand up on its own two legs. But I get the feeling that there is a desire from within to like, hey, let's shake off some of this perception that we're all corrupt, and let's let some of these business people stand up and say, I want to help. I am a business person. I know. What are your thoughts on how we blend this? Like, we'll let Elon Musk, but we won't let so-and-so. And the other person's like, I am all for Ukraine. I am Ukrainian. Let me help, but we won't let that person help because he is an oligarch.
Well, yeah, that's a very interesting point, and very relevant indeed. I have to remember Zelensky came in on an anti-corruption ticket.
Right.
His predecessors, whilst they brought in an independent Ukraine and had worked their way forward, his predecessors were still closely linked to the old ways of doing things.
That's right.
And if we look at Russian politics, there are four elements that keep Russian politics going. There's the political structure that's there, and the main leaders are there. So we've got Putin and his political structure that's there. We've got the intelligence services that are working to keep Putin in place and everything else. We've got the military, which is the strongest element that's there, and who controls that, controls everything else. But there's one bit that underpins all of it, and that's money.
Mm-hmm.
And the money is run through organized criminal networks. And that money allows individuals to become oligarchs and to monopolize different parts of the economy. So Prigozhin, as he came up, started off as a hot dog seller on the streets of St. Petersburg. Then, with a chance meeting of Vladimir Putin and some discussions, got in to be Putin's chef in the Kremlin. As he was in Putin's chef in the Kremlin, they hatched a plan for him to take over the contract to supply food to all of the Russian military, which numerically is huge. But in supplying the food to the Russian military, it means that you supply just enough, or maybe not even enough, that's in there, but you charge for gold standard rates, and the rest of it goes in your back pocket. And Putin would cream off, he'd allow that, he'd sign it off, he'd cream off 60% and leave Prigozhin with 40%. Prigozhin became a multi-billionaire in doing that. Putin does that with everything. He does it with those that support, that supply oil and gas. There's only one or two oligarchs that are in charge of all of the retail outlets across Russia. No matter what brand it is, they run all the retail outlets. There's only one or two that run the transport. There's only one or two that run the communications. There's only one or two that run the internet connections. These are all his oligarchs that are in his inner circle, and they control everything. But the only reason why they can control everything is the man in the middle who sets the policy, who actually owns the intelligence services, who's got control over the military, and therefore has got the real power, is giving them the legal authority under Russian rules to allow them to do that. So everything that's happening is underpinned by this massive oligarch-driven, serious and organized criminal network that's operating across the globe. Hence why the links into Africa through the Wagner Group, through Prigozhin, into diamonds and gold and hardwood and oil and everything else. And actually, it's become more important since international sanctions have come in, because the oligarchs can move the wealth around in gold and diamonds, because that's easier to move around in the back of an aircraft or the back of a boat or with other people than it is to move cash around through networks that have been sanctioned, through accounts that have been sanctioned, through areas where the international community can turn around and say, "Oh, you, Mr. Oligarch, we've just identified this new account for you.
Right.
We're freezing it." That you can't freeze diamonds if they're in someone's back pocket.
So let's talk about the Ukrainian side of the oligarch thing, or the difference between oligarch versus businessman.
Yeah.
And even if there's, because look, in this region, a lot of these guys came up in the same world, right?
Yeah.
These guys know each other.
Oh, 100%, 100%.
So the Ukrainian dudes that are like, I am first and foremost a Ukrainian and a businessman, and I am look. We used to do business with Russia. That day is over. Maybe one day down the road, because these guys are still neighbors, but down the road, maybe we'll get back to that. But for right now, I'm a Ukrainian. I'm a businessman. I can help. We seem desperate to kick these people out. And this is one of the mistakes we made in Iraq. We have these people like, I am trained at the London School of Economics. I am, an engineer trained in England. Oh yeah, well, fuck you. You're a Ba'athist, right? Like, no. Like, this guy actually knows how to run this factory, right? So I don't want us to make this mistake again. This is where I'm trying to get to.
But
so
I was going to say,
how do we do this?
100%. But this is with the Ukrainians, as you rightly point out, came up in the same area, and Zelensky came in on the anti-corruption ticket, and these business people were still following the oligarch type model. It operated in Ukraine, but when Zelensky came in, he started to break that down, and he started to get people to properly pay taxes, to fill in and become proper, more honest businesses and all the rest of it. And until the Russian invasion came in, he was hated. Business hated him. Politically, the people loved him. But those business leaders across Ukraine hated him. He was not a popular character in any way, shape, or form from a political perspective. He was a comedian. They describe him from a business perspective as a comedian. However, once the conflicts come in, they've suddenly realized that actually there are more opportunities here. Now, are a lot of the Ukrainian business people and business ventures ripping off the money that's coming in from the West and everything else? Hell yes, but it happens in every conflict. There will be. But what's interesting to see is that Zelensky, even the whole way through this, has been putting people in prison. He's been sacking people from his government and all the rest of it, who he's identified as ripping things off and all the rest of it. He's accelerated the Ukraine's ability to get into the EU. And one of the criteria for getting into the EU is to make sure that your anti-corruption laws are and behaviors and all the rest of it are demonstrably at a level that the EU will accept. I'm being careful in my language here, because a lot of the current countries that are in the EU, including some of the very big ones, are as corrupt as Ukraine was beforehand and everything else, and as corrupt as a lot of businesses across different countries in the world, including the United States, because business at the end of the day is the art of ripping people off and making them think that they've got a good deal and doing it as close to the edge of the law as possible. That's how you make your profits.
I hear you saying all these things, and I understand it, and I get all these things. We want to see Ukraine continue to improve. We also know that they're terribly corrupt still. I mean, they're still like, not even a month ago, their Supreme Court head justice was arrested with a lot of money, and he was going to be greasing some more justices. So we know that there's problems. I don't see the ability for, and look, this is too, like, we know once you're marked as a bad person, right or wrong, whether that mark is right or wrong, we do not let people correct themselves. We don't ever let them get up and be like, hey, I'm actually a great Ukrainian and I actually want to help. We don't let that happen. So what I don't see are the Ukrainians who are great business people. I don't see them allowed to go out and say, hey, you know what? I am a multimillionaire, I am a billionaire, and I have means of helping. I don't see that motion happening.
Yeah, I think it's happening, but it's not happening in the public domain.
Because, fair enough.
Because if we look at what's going on, right, let's look at it from an innovation perspective. And I'm talking to a couple of Ukrainian firms on this at the moment for a conference we're putting together at the end of September in London. But one of the biggest areas that they are growing in at the moment is developing drone technology.
Okay.
And you can see the innovation that's coming out in a lot of what they're producing, and they are going to be rivaling the Chinese in drone technology development and everything else. I've seen some of the stuff that they're doing, and it's phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. That is being underpinned by Ukrainian businesses, Ukrainian business people, and all the rest of it. If we look at the likes of a lot of the Western arms manufacturers who are looking at opening up manufacturing or at least assembly plants inside Ukraine, that is being funded through Ukrainian business. So a lot of the legitimate business that's going on in Ukraine is happening behind closed doors. Why is that happening behind closed doors? Well, these are international business people and all the rest of it. It means that they are less of a target for Russian and Russian influenced individuals that are operating elsewhere. So it's partially because of their own security that this is happening. And the positive thing is, you mentioned the Supreme Court judge that got moved on. The positive thing is we've seen that happening. We've seen the leaders for the military recruiting in every region in Ukraine be sacked. And potentially being charged because they were accepting backhand bribes to stop people from being called up to go to the front line. So what we're seeing from an overt political perspective is a purge of a lot of the corrupt activities that were going on beforehand. What we're not seeing are the legitimate businesses flying the flag and saying, hey, we're really doing this, but actually that makes them a target. In what is a major conflict, and I'd understand why they're doing that, knowing how they know your customer and the things that have to be put in place for the likes of Rheinmetall and BAE Systems and other organizations to get in and to be able to open up businesses there. Their due diligence is good enough to suggest that they've checked all of this, and politically as well. It was only a few years ago where I was talking to some generals that were going across on visits to Ukraine, and all of a sudden there would be, as they were leaving the bar to go back to their room, this stunningly beautiful blonde woman would come and attach themselves to them and say, "Oh, well, let me take you back to your room, sir," as it had been paid and all the rest of it. And all of that sort of stuff has, again, speaking to diplomats that are there, stopped. So the old Soviet ways of doing things are changing, and the new Ukrainian ways, more Western focused and Western lined, are definitely coming in, and they're being accelerated. This has all happened really since the war started. So we're talking of 18 months now, and to do this sort of change in 18 months is significant.
No, that's significant. I would say that I'm going to challenge you a little bit. And look, you and I both know it's a mess, and that's why we're having this kind of conversation. So some of the things that I've seen is I'm seeing court cases leaking out of Ukrainian court and going to the greater European courts, because there's the state is overreaching. They're statefying certain assets, and then the business owner legitimately saying, hey, I own this. And then Ukraine's going, not anymore, you don't. We're not paying you for it. And so the business is like, and I'm just giving you an example. There's a number of these things. They go to the European court, and then the European court's like, actually, that person does own that, and I'm finding in their favor. Here's your judgment. And they go back to Ukrainian court. Ukrainian court's like, get lost. And so that person's like, okay. And so can't exercise that judgment in Ukraine, but they can externally. So when BAE goes to invest, they're like, oh, hold on. There's a $400 million lien on this property. And this is, again, an example, right? But these are things are happening. So that's going to retard external investment. There's also, and these are the parts of the machine. Like, so this is ground truth, Pete, right? This is when I go out and I look at Afghanistan, is the government working? And I see, hey, we're in a firefight. So I go to the Afghan police. Okay, we just were in a firefight. I saw that. You fired 2 RPGs, I don't know, maybe 2,000 rounds of ammo. How do you replenish that? Oh, we're going to send up a request. And so here's what Pete does. Pete follows that request. It goes up, 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 and no ammo ever comes back. Someone kills it. And they're like, those guys are lying. They sold their ammo. And I'm like, I was there. I watched it. They actually fired the ammo. They actually need it. And so the system doesn't work, right? And so here's one of the things that happens is the corruption task force, whoever it is, there's several of these things in Ukraine. They'll say, this company's corrupt. We're going to go seize it, and we're going to fire these people or put them in jail. And then they'll do nothing else. and they'll
Yeah.
bring in like the new people that are clean. These aren't corrupt people, but they don't know how to run the machine,
Correct.
the business,
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then a couple of months later, Ukraine will come back and be like, "Hey, business owner, we don't know how to run your machine. Can
Yeah.
you please run the machine?" So there is a cost, there is a penalty, and now the person comes back and they're like, "Why did you arrest me?" So there is some graft going on there. That again, this is going to retard growth, and I'm afraid that we see the news story, and like you and I both look at the news all the time, and we see these things. So you see the front pretty news story of, "Hey, we arrested these people. We're going to make them pay," and then on the back end, you don't see the fact that, a couple months later, like we had to actually, we did the wrong thing. We need these guys to run.
We'll have
this
to let them
machine.
out and then bring them in. Say sorry. Come on. Yeah.
Yeah. So you and I both know like these things are happening, and so it's like it's a canard in some ways. I'm not saying that there's not progress being made. I'm not saying those things, but there is a lot of corruption going on. There's a lot of trying to sort these things out. Look, two of the biggest donors to the Atlantic Council that writes a lot of these negative press pieces are Pinchuk and Riyadh. The two biggest oligarchs of all are the biggest donors, and these guys benefit from these negative press pieces that go out against their competition. So I just am very suspect. And I've watched the U.S. go in and get this stuff wrong over and over over.
Yeah. And the international community go and get everything you said is 100% right. And you can't argue against it. You look at how businesses develop. In when we're doing business in the West, and we're doing business even out of the West into the Far East and elsewhere. It takes tens of years to get through all of the issues that you've brought out that are going on anyway. Add in there where you're dealing with a country that is on a national survival basis, because that's what Ukraine is. It's on a national survival basis, but not only a national survival basis where the country's leader is someone that A, was unpopular, and B, didn't come in really on a political ticket. He came in because he was to the masses seen as a popular individual. He hadn't got any political background apart from playing it on television. Have we got any US presidents in relatively recent history who've come in from that sort of background and done stuff and achieved things?
I can't think of any.
No.
We have the best people here. We only
exactly. But he's come in doing that, and you're gonna get those real difficulties that are going through whenever you've got so many different factors competing with each other. And this is where then political judgment's at the center, and this is where the Ukrainian central courts at the moment can turn around and stick the middle finger up and say, "Fuck you, European court. We're doing what we want because we're a sovereign nation. We're not part of the EU." However, when it then comes to the final vinegar strokes of negotiating your membership of the EU, they're going to go, "Hey, well, we're really sorry. We got that wrong. We'll fix it. Here's where we've changed our laws to make sure that can never happen again." But they're going to do that knowing that Russia's been defeated and pushed out. And they know that they can get away with that. And it's that balance at the minute that is the political game. And this is where politicians, no answer is ever black or white. There's always, you're in this horrible gray area, and whatever answer you come up with is not going to be right for every element that you're trying to influence. So it's trying to judge as to which is the most important bit that you influence at that time and have the least long-term effect as you're dealing with it, knowing that your decision is going to affect something from the long term, almost certainly in a negative way, and it's going to affect people today in what's going on. And that balancing act is where the politicians make their money. And looking at Zelensky and the way he's dealing with it, I think he's giving global leaders a masterclass on how to do leadership in under the most intense of circumstances, and you're balancing all of these different moving parts and different priorities, because his business community, they're interested in the war because of the way it's affecting them, and the way it's stopping them making the money and the way they used to. They're loving the fact that the international community is effectively taking out blank checks and throwing them at Ukraine. They're going, hey, I'm a business, I can catch that blank check. How can I add another 10 knots to the end of it so that I can make my money out of it? And some people are doing that. But look at the whole of the West's approach to dealing with a pandemic when COVID came through, and what we threw at our healthcare and what we threw at everything else, and look at everything else. You get those corrupt business elements that are doing things that are self-focused, not wider focused. And
still,
we've been
to this day,
and still to this day, and we've supposedly had our politics and policies that have been corrupt free and looking after the national interests and looking after the interests of the individuals for hundreds of tens of years, whereas Ukraine's only had it for 18 months. Hey, give them a break. I think they're doing a bloody good job under really difficult circumstances, and they've got time to sweep up.
Honestly, I'm less worried about the Ukrainians. I'm more worried about us. And let me give you an example. I read Bibi Netanyahu's book, and he's like talking about the U.S.'s desire for a two-state solution. And then he's like, look, here's why that won't work. And then a third of the book is writing about that. He's like, here's what does work: business. And in a lot of ways, Ukraine and Israel are really in the same kind of boat. And what Bibi's like, look, they keep coming after me. They keep finding nothing. And every time I get reelected, the country just leaps forward because we invest in business and technology and we go forward. And we want to work with Egypt and Jordan. And so we repair nations and our links by just focusing on business. By the way, in one of the ways where Donald Trump was a good president, he sent his Jewish son-in-law into the Middle East and started getting deals, right? And they're like, let's just normalize on business ties. And it was working. I'm doing quoted fingers. It was working. And so if the Palestinians want to join us, let's do it. Let's work this as a nation and let's all go forward together. And so really that isn't what the US wants. We hate that. We're like, oh, we don't like that. And I'm afraid that we're going to do something similar with Ukraine, where our solution for Ukraine doesn't align with what look, if we got out of their business leaders' way, they're going to repair Ukraine a lot faster than the US is going to do it. Yep. The other thing I want to say to that is, and that's just economics, like get out of their way, let them figure it out, and let's support them. And then I want to ask you this, I want you to respond to that, and then also help me understand this. Should the US be the lead, what I think is the lead dog now, or should we start to back up and let Europe start to lead, and then we'll contribute and let you guys over there, and I'm putting you in Europe, but let you guys, because really it's more continental Europe's fault, or not fault, but job to contribute. So how should that ratio be? Because again, I don't trust us. The US brings instability and oftentimes bad solutions, and then we're not responsible when we screw it up. Like we just go like, oh well, see you later, we're leaving. I'm back.
Well, God, there's so much in that. That's coming in, and we look at a recent history, and it's not just the US, it's the wider international community. But look at Iraq, we fucked that up. And look at Afghanistan, we fucked that up. 2 years ago, it's coming up to exactly 2 years from the big evacuation out of Kabul. 2 years ago, there was a big defense exhibition in London, and it's coming up again this September. And the UK's Chief of Defence Intelligence, who just I happen to know him quite well, very well indeed. As Operation Pitting, we called it in the UK, the evacuation went ahead. I turned around to him in an open press conference, being a card-carrying member of the press now. I turned around and said, Jim, what's it like to be the Chief of Defence Intelligence, overseeing the single biggest intelligence failure by not seeing the Taliban coming into Kabul the way they did, the biggest single intelligence failure since the fall of Singapore in 1942? He didn't appreciate that question in a public environment from someone who knew him quite well, but he couldn't answer it. And I'm going to ask him exactly the same again in a couple of weeks' time, and he won't be able to answer it because it was, from a Western perspective, an intelligence failure. I am just about to upset 50% of your audience. I am not a Trump supporter in any way, shape, or form. However, I do think that from a political perspective, the decision that Donald Trump made to withdraw US forces from Afghanistan, from a political perspective, was correct and what he was being briefed. Because what he was being briefed by his politicians on the ground, and by his generals on the ground was, "Sir, we've managed to get the Afghan army to this standard, and they can carry out these sorts of operations. We've given them all this kit, and the Afghan police are trained, and they can do this. Their security operations are really good, and they can secure the ground. They're doing everything else." So President Trump says, "Well, why am I spending trillions of US dollars, US taxpayers' dollars on keeping this going? If you're saying they're ready to do it, are they capable of doing this, sir?" "Yes, sir," is the answer that went into him. He said, "Okay, right, I'm withdrawing." None of them turned around and said, "But sir, they're only capable of doing it if we're there to control the supply of the money, to produce the logistics, to give them backbone, to mentor them, and all the rest of it." No politician and no general stood up and said that to President Trump. No politician and no general stood up and said that to the British prime ministers. The same to Australian prime minister, French president, and anything else. Our military commanders let us down. They would only brief positive things to the senior leadership, and that's why we fucked this up enormously. And it really, and the same thing happened in Iraq. Our military leaders only brief positive stuff up. Our politicians, in looking after our taxpayers' money, made the right decision. It was our military leaders and the deployed political individuals that were in there that really cocked this up, and I think they should be held to account. Now, when that then translates into what's going on in Ukraine, and should we support it in a different way, I think you have to look at Europe, and this is where the UK is in an interesting position now with Brexit. We've always been this bridge between the United States and Europe because of our links with the Permanent Five in the Security Council. France is on there as well, so France should have the bridge. But the advantage that the UK's got is we're part of the Five Eyes community. And the other bit that comes in is we've got this, what everyone describes as a special relationship. Our politicians try and describe the special relationship as something that it's not. The special relationship is purely an intelligence relationship where we have got, and I have to be careful what I can say here because of the classifications of this stuff still at. We've got a relationship between the UK and the US that, and it goes out to wider Five Eyes, but particularly the UK and the US, where there are things that we do for each other that neither of us can do for ourselves. And actually, if we don't, if that ever separated, the UK would never be able to replicate what the US does for the UK. The US would never be able to replicate what the UK is doing for the US. And therefore, that special relationship, which started during the Second World War with Enigma, has been cemented together in a way that it, no matter what the politicians say, would be impossible to break unless we became mortal enemies and started to fight each other, which will never happen. We let you have continental United States whenever you wanted the War of Independence because the White House wasn't worth keeping, and allowed all that to happen. We had other things to go and concentrate on, like losing the rest of the empire. But and this is where I think we have to be really careful and we look at things. I don't think Europe has got the political togetherness to be able to support Ukraine in the way that it's going, and there's also a lot of corrupt activity that goes on inside inside Europe that we don't necessarily want applied into the rebuilding of Ukraine. I'll give you an example. When we were planning for Bosnia and planning for the Dayton Peace Agreement, we had three nations that had agreed to come in and take big chunks of Bosnia and look after different areas. The United States, the United Kingdom, and France. France insisted that they had the sector that had Sarajevo as part of it because they wanted that. The reason why they wanted that is they'd already pre-let contracts to French companies to rebuild Sarajevo using EU money. However, for those that know the geography of Bosnia, off from Sarajevo were the enclaves of Srebrenica and Gorazde and all the rest of it. So from a geographical perspective, if you've got military control of Sarajevo sector, you had to have military control of those sectors.
Right.
So when the French general came to briefing the NATO general, who just happened to be British, who was leading the land operation that was in there, and finished his briefing, he hadn't mentioned Srebrenica and Gorazde and anything else. And he sat down And General Sir Mike Walker stood up and said, Mon General, you've given me a fantastic plan. You will look after the Sarajevo sector extremely well for me and everything else. But I think you have missed something. The French general stood up and said, Mon General, you've noticed that I haven't mentioned the enclaves. The reason why I've mentioned the enclaves is my government said it's not my responsibility. So I haven't considered it, and sat down again. And that caused a real problem. And that shows the real political issues that there are in working, and in particular in Europe. And the UK and the US sat down, and we could bring political pressure then into France, and we could then bring in an international solution that allowed us to deal with that. But we had to impose some structures on into French command and control that was going on in there. And UK and US had the other sectors. UK and US are very good at working together on this from a political perspective, as well as a military perspective, because we've got similar cultures, similar backgrounds. We've grown up the same way. We fought each other. You won. Hey, and there's no hard feelings. Linguistically, we are similar, but we still confuse each other when we talk. But there's enough of that common understanding, that common background, to be able to get that bit and push forward. And therefore, I think when it comes to dealing with Ukraine, the worst thing that we could do is try and create friction lines or separation in what we're doing, because Putin will find a way of getting the proverbial knife in those lines, wiggling it and creating fractures politically. If we come at things from a united perspective, he hasn't got that. And that's where, if he's no room to maneuver, we will properly deal with them in a way that not just deals with Putin, but then sends a very clear message out to the much longer term threats, which are China and Xi Jinping. And we have to be really worried, because we from Western nations think about things in presidential terms, or in the UK, prime ministerial and parliamentary terms, or probably more accurately, our politicians are thinking about things in what tomorrow morning's tweet's going to be, or what tomorrow morning's headlines are going to be, and we react the whole time. The likes of Xi Jinping, the likes of Vladimir Putin, the likes of Ayatollah, the likes of Kim Jong-un, the likes of are thinking multi-generational terms, because they know they're going to be in for 20, 25, 30 plus years, or the successors are. And they're planning that far out, and they're taking little nibbles on everything in what they're doing diplomatically, militarily, and all the rest of it, knowing that that's not across the threshold for an immediate reaction from the West in any way, shape, or form, because we're too busy worrying about what the bloody hell is going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah. One more topic I want to bring up with you. When I'm reading a lot of the press, and I'm talking about European press, Ukrainian, across the spectrum I'm reading, I see a lot of spin in the media where they'll pick a character, they'll pick an event, and they'll tell a very slanted version of that. And you and I both know, like, that's going to benefit someone, something, bury a story on somebody. And then you'll see the secondary story that confirms the alleged, and they'll say this person is this, or this event was that. Who benefits from that? Who is getting the win that that these stories, when they self-perpetuate, who's doing that, and who are they doing it for?
Nobody benefits from it. That's the sad thing.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
In what's going on, you'll get short-term benefits, and this comes into the short-termism in what's going on. I'll bring it back to Ireland again. One of the political organizations that's very good at doing this is Sinn Féin, which was the political wing of the IRA. They're trying to suggest that all of the atrocities that happened across Ireland were carried out by the British military. They try to suggest that the British military killed more Irish people than anything else. If you look at the statistics, and the simple statistics, and they're published by international bodies that are out there, the IRA killed more Irishmen and Irish women, and killed more Catholics than any of the other groupings that was in there. That is not what comes out in history. So who's benefiting what in what they're doing and what they're putting out in this, what I call soundbite politics? There's no substance behind it anymore. It's all soundbite, because the press loves soundbites. What we get instantly on our mobile devices and all the rest of it is all relating to soundbites and other bits and pieces. People don't have time to analyze things anymore. Therefore, will react to sound bites, and therefore it's people that are losing out, because they're believing things, they're listening to things, and our politicians are recognizing that. And instead of trying to be more open, more honest, more accurate in what they're doing. They see this as a marketing game. That marketing game is then enabled, and here's where it gets really dangerous, enabled by people that have got access to big data. So analyzing what you're doing in social media, but not just what you're doing, what your friends are doing, what your family are doing, what influences you, what makes you go on. You know, how many times do you sit there and think, oh, I'm thinking of going on holiday to such and such next month, and all of a sudden, within 30 seconds of you thinking it, you start to get these adverts pop up on your screen as you go through going, oh, have you thinking of holidays to such and such? Here, buy these suitcases. There's cheap flights to the very destination you're thinking about. You're going, oh my God, how have they analyzed my brain? But there are organizations that are out there who are taking all of that big data. They're looking at it very carefully. They're applying manipulative marketing techniques to it, and they're then using targeted information and targeted things coming up into your timeline, and it'll be targeted to messages that'll influence you, and influence your family, and influence the group that you're in, because they know how to try and tweak things over a period of time, very slowly and suggestively. And we don't help ourselves, because when we look at things on social media, you get the you put your tweet out. Can I say tweet, or do I put an X out now?
Yeah,
Whatever it is. It's a what? An Elon. I'll call it an Elon. I'll put an Elon out now. And people disagree with me. I get 60% of the people that disagree with me, and I know I'm right. So I block all those that disagree with me. The next one I put out, 40% of people disagree with me. I think, well, I've got better, so I'll block a few people on that. The next one I put out, 20% disagree with me. And I'm going, oh, look, I must be right now. So many more people are agreeing with me. The next one I put out, 5% of people disagree with me. I go, that proves I'm right. Well, no, it doesn't prove you're right. It means that you have got rid of all of the alternative arguments that are coming in that will deal with things. You're self-misinforming, and I call that self-misinforming groupthink. It's really worrying the way data and messaging can be influenced and retargeted at us in a way that changes the way we think at the minute. And do the Russians realize that? Hell yes. Do the Chinese realize that? Hell yes. Do big businesses realize that? Oh God, yeah. And are they influencing us? Yep. Should we be worried? Definitely.
One of the questions that Aaron asks is, are the French and German trustworthy when it comes to Russia? That's a great question, because they have different goals. Like, I was taught by a Finn, a military Finn who's also a professor. He's like, there are many Europes, Pete. There are many Europes.
Yeah.
And so, what do you think? Are they trustworthy?
It depends how you define trustworthy. Within France and Germany, there's so many different factions that are looking at things from different perspectives. Germany, from a political perspective, is in a very difficult position, because its governmental structure is designed that will always have a coalition, and therefore any political decisions that they make will always have to give in to one of the other minority parties that are in there. So the Green Party in Germany has got a big influence. The AfD, the far right party, have an increasing influence in what's going on. It's not quite in government yet, but not far off it. But again, underpinning a lot of what's going on in Germany, we all think of Germany where everything works and it's very reliable and it's everything else. Actually, business in Germany, and I've lived in Germany for 13 years, big business in Germany is as corrupt as a lot of the big business that there is in Ukraine and everything else. You just have to look at the emissions scandal that came out of BMW and Mercedes and all the rest of it. You go back and do some research, and you find that the head of the Bundespost quite a number of years ago was arrested for corruption and all the rest of it. That underpins everything that goes on in there. And then you got France. Oh my God. Yeah. Well, it happens everywhere. And therefore, yes, you can trust them because they are working in the same sort of areas that we do and everything else, but they don't trust us as much as we don't trust them, and they will always look after self-interest in the first place. So when it comes to the application of European rules, there's an old joke. The Germans would invent them, the French would ignore them, the Brits would apply them. Now, we've done Brexit, so we don't have to apply European rules anymore, but it's still the Germans will invent them, the Germans don't apply them. The French just don't apply them. The French do things the French way all of the time. Most industries, defense industries and stuff in France are partially owned by the state. They will only buy French stuff. They'll only sell French stuff because it's money coming into the state. They'll not allow any other international company to come in and do stuff unless it's opened up a French entity. The Germans are very similar.
Hey, we're right at an hour. Do you want to ask me any questions at all? I've had you go, and you have been awesome. It's been such a great ride. But do you want to ask me anything?
Crikey! Well, what's going to happen in the elections next year? Who's going to win? This is where we're all looking at from this side of the pond.
The thing I can promise you is it's going to get crazy, and then as soon as you think it's crazy, it's going to get crazy,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know. I mean, it is such a wild card. The two old men. I mean, one of those dudes could legitimately drop dead between now and then.
I know, and what's happened to Camilla, and is she up to be president if Joe drops dead, and who's going to be Donald's running partner if he's and will he be able to be president whilst chained up and in high security prison?
I just don't know. Like I'm not a Trump person. Here's what I do know: he will purposely destroy things and never give up. Like he is just like a destructo bot, right? Yeah. And so it doesn't matter what else he does. He is just so bad. He is like this rotten thing that drives people crazy.
I think it's very clever. You look at it from the outside. I think it's very clever that he's being impeached from a number of state laws. So he can't then pardon himself from a federal perspective. That's extremely clever. But God, where does Secret Service stay if he's in prison? Have they got a cell beside him? Do they get sentenced as well?
I mean, a lot of that stuff is theater. A lot of it's porn. A lot of it's really honestly porn. And I'm not justifying any of his behavior at all. I'm just saying that a lot of that is just that's just chum for people that want to be distracted by that stuff.
Yeah.
Who cares about a stupid mugshot? The fact that that's newsworthy is ridiculous.
Exactly.
So, but I mean, like the serious question of like who's going to be able to run the country, I don't know. I mean, we're talking about honestly like Robert Kennedy and then whoever the Republicans can get to stand up, besides Donald Trump, and that's today it's Vivek or maybe Ron DeSantis, but it's so early. Who even knows, and the polls everybody quotes the polls, and then the polls end up being so out of whack and so wrong. Yeah. So I have no idea, and honestly, I have no idea who I'm going to vote for.
Yeah,
and
that's the scary bit. How can a country the size of the United States have as its two leading politicians are two? They're almost both octogenarians. Trump's not far off it,
right?
And where's the young blood coming from that have got this global view? Because I don't know who's standing against Joe Biden at the minute. I have that sort of side of the campaign hasn't been reported this side of the pond, but looking at some of the initial Republican debates that have gone on, oh my God, some of those individuals that are in there they're clearly playing just a domestic audience, but they haven't got a clue about what's going on around the world.
We are really bad at foreign policy. The last good foreign policy person is probably George Bush the elder. The rest of them have just sort of, that's fine. I don't mind that. I'm just telling you my own personal thing. Maybe Bill Clinton post-presidency has improved himself, and just because he gets called still to this day to deal with things. And so I'll give him a nod and say that he's matured nicely into that role. But, the rest of them have just been like, let's try this.
So I go back further and say the one who came across best, and it was probably just his advising team getting in there, was probably Reagan. And that'll be a controversial thing to say. Your Bush Senior, was it Bush Senior? No, Bush Senior. Bush Junior has got a lot of history in there, and if that history ever came out with the British Prime Minister that was in at the time, Tony Blair, if that history ever came out, both of them would find themselves in prison faster than
I don't get
in there.
I don't give him a lot of credit. I think he tried something, and I don't think it worked out. How about that?
Yeah.
And then, for whatever reason, Barack Obama followed his doctrine, and that didn't work out. And it just hasn't gone too well.
Yeah, but I think but interesting. It's interesting to say that, and interesting to talk about people from Obama's perspective. Obama, from an international perspective, came across exceptionally well. He didn't deliver a
No,
lot.
that's for sure. Yeah.
But then domestically, he didn't come across well and didn't deliver. So, that's issues that are there. But a lot of people would, instinctively harp back to this nice man that's there, and when you compare it to some of the others that are around. But then that's naive going back to it. And who am I to say? Just look at what's happening in British politics and stuff with Boris Johnson, and then the quick Liz Truss as Prime Minister now, Rishi Sunak coming in, and we've got next year is going to be interesting because we've got US presidential elections, we've got Russian presidential elections with Vladimir Putin. We know what's going to happen in there, and we've got British Prime Minister elections. We've got our parliamentary elections. So if ever there's a time for international discourse, next year is it.
Next year is it.
Yeah.
Well, this was awesome. Let's do it again, and let's not wait so long between sessions, because it was fun the last time.
Anytime.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let me run these credits and stand by, and I'll be right back to you. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by your